Hello, and welcome back to Bookstr Talks. I am live with Mike Curato, the author and illustrator behind the wonderful Flamer. I'll be asking him some questions of my own first, but please do pop some questions down below in the comments. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. You're very welcome.
Thanks for having me, Saoirse.
Of course. I guess a good place to start is that could you tell any unknowing audience member what Flamer is about?
Sure. Flamer is a YA graphic novel. It's the story of Aiden Navarro, who is a 14-year-old Filipino white mixed kid who is away at scout camp the summer before his first year of high school. And he is dealing with navigating friendships and bullying. He has questions about his religion. He's dealing with a lot of body image issues, and he also has to deal with a lot of racism. And all that is just the backdrop to Aiden confronting his sexual identity. But there is some levity built into it too. It's not all doom and gloom, yeah.
And what inspired you to write it? How did it come about?
Even though it's a work of fiction, it's very much rooted in my own personal experience. So I really tried to imbue the story with some truths that I discovered in my own youth. Specifically, this is a bit of a giveaway, but in the afterword, I talk about how as a teenager who was in the closet and really struggling, I did deal with suicide ideation. And that's really what the story is centered around. So that was kind of the crux of everything. And then I just kind of had this brain dump of ideas, feelings, memories that I then used to weave the story around it.
And I mean, that part of the book that you mentioned, it's a sucker punch. It really is. Because like you say, there is some levity to it, but that part really struck me. And I guess, was it difficult for you to revisit such a time in your life, in writing this?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there were some tough days there. And, on those days when it was just too much, I would just kind of switch things up and maybe work on a lighter part of the book, or have an admin day. And then there were days that, I just had to watch movies and eat ice cream. It's all part of the process. But also just to add on to the reason why focus on suicide ideation. I think it's a really common experience for a lot of people, I should say, but specifically a common experience for queer youth. And I've been alarmed seeing the rates of teen suicide climb over the years. Gay and queer youth are at a higher risk of suicide, of self-harm, of homelessness than their straight peers. And if that queer youth is also trans and or a person of color, the risks increase even more. So I very much would like this book to be a lifeline to those who are struggling to find themselves and to find their community, because I didn't see myself in books or on screens when I was that struggling kid. So I'm hoping that this can do that for somebody.
And that, that is something that you don't see, and it's not a lot of representation. You do see a lot in graphic novels, particularly. But I mean, I guess the question I kind of had about it being a graphic novel was that, you obviously took on a hell of a workload, being the writer and illustrator behind it. Was there an aspect of that you preferred over the other, or was it all one big thing you enjoyed?
Yeah, I mean, I actually decided to make a graphic novel because I was an avid comic book reader when I was Aiden's age. It's all I read. I wasn't really ready for giant bricks of prose. I very much was excited by the artwork and the stories in the comic books I read. So I'm really hoping that this format will speak to that age group. But this was also like a different process for me because usually I make picture books for the littles. And, those are usually 32 to 40 pages. This is like, over 360 pages.
Deceptively large. It is.
Yeah. But in this case, I sat down and wrote the whole thing first, whereas usually when I'm working on a picture book, the writing and the art are usually going on at the same time, writing and illustrating, writing and illustrating, and the two kind of change each other. And this was a different experience. So even though I worked on them separately, it didn't feel complete until I had the imagery to go along with what I wrote. And even the people who read it just as a manuscript, I think felt things even more after it was finally illustrated.
And so, what's the importance of color in the book? Because, does it play kind of more of a role in the narrative? Because something that's really striking about it is that it only appears kind of periodically throughout.
Right. So I'm just going to grab a copy here.
Here's one you made earlier.
Yeah, what Saoirse is referring to is that the book is primarily in black and white, and then it's highlighted in certain situations by reds and oranges. Obviously, with a name like Flamer, there is a theme of fire, a visual theme that threads throughout the book. And sometimes it's more of the atmosphere is colored, or there's an inanimate object that I want to bring to the reader's attention. But all of that is to play up the emotion of the scene. And that can really range from fear to hatred to love, to anger. There's a lot of emotion in just the color.
And was that something that you had in mind from the beginning, or did that kind of come about as you started the design process?
It was very, very early on I had the idea, because I immediately thought, oh, of course I'm going to do this in black and white because of the starkness of the story. And also the style I wanted to be a lot rougher than my usual work. But then I also wanted the flames to be represented. I wanted the fierceness of that fire to come through. And so very early on, I thought like, well, just using some spot color is going to be that much more impactful than either black and white or full color. So yeah, I'm glad I went that direction.
And it is very striking, as I wouldn't be someone who reads a whole lot of graphic novels, but it, like, reading it was really powerful, which you kind of, sometimes people think that a picture book won't have, a picture book, a graphic novel won't have the same impact, but it had even more so. I thought it was really, really moving. And the color played such a huge part in that. I thought it was, yeah, really got that across.
Thanks.
And so, you mentioned a while ago the kind of impact of him dealing with the religious aspects of his life. What kind of a role do you think that religion plays in the story?
Well, Aiden is devoutly Catholic. He has just graduated from a Catholic school and is heading to public high school. So he's very much someone that wants to be a good person, and so therefore he wants to follow by the rules. And Catholicism has a lot of rules, as we know. And I think it represents something that all of us struggle with, which is that, human beings are multifaceted. We're going to have different aspects of ourselves that are in conflict with each other. So Aiden's realization of his queerness is at first at odds with his Catholic identity, because he's been taught that homosexuality is a sin, and he doesn't think of himself as a bad person. He's really trying to do right. So therein lies the you know, enigma of existence. It's like, well, I'm not supposed to be able to be this thing, and yet here I am, which was very much my experience growing up. So,
And on the day that the Pope has just said that same-sex civil union should be a thing, it's even more beautiful.
yes, come through, Francis. I was very happy to
He did a
hear
lot of
that
lockdown
news.
thinking. That's all it is.
Yeah,
It was too much
yeah,
time to think. And
yeah.
so, what is your favorite thing about Aiden as a character?
Um, I like to think of Aiden as a much more courageous version of my young self. So that's the great joy in writing fiction, is that you can um, instill things in your characters that maybe you wish you had. Um, at least when I was 14, I didn't have some of the brave moments that Aiden displayed. So it's it's very joyful for me to watch this character stand up for himself, to watch him um, embrace who he is a lot sooner than I was able to when I was his age. And I hope that he is able to kind of lead the way for some readers who are in the same boat.
And so, you've kind of touched on this before, but a lot of Flamer is really funny. And was it important to you that it had that comic relief aspect?
Absolutely, because speaking of joy, I think it's important, we've talked about representation, not just that the queer struggle is represented, but we need queer joy as well. Um, and my childhood wasn't all doom and gloom, even though I had suicidal ideation. Of course, there were things that were good in my life um, that thank God I had, um, some happiness, what little I could count on. And, and I think this is also a very common gay experience, that we really rely on our sense of humor to see us through the dark days, which, isn't just a gay thing, obviously, but I have found is very common. I found a lot of gay people have a biting sense of humor, because if you can't laugh about it, like, it's gonna be a rough road, honey. So yeah, and not just that, but also, I was trying to throw my reader a bone, because I don't want someone to have to sit through 360 pages and be like, oh my God, this was exhausting. And I think we kind of need those moments in a story that kind of buoy us through the depths of the ocean. And I forgot what I was going to say next, but
Well, no, it is true. And for all that, as someone who has read it and not written it, it is true that, his like Aiden's humor, even despite all that he's experiencing and going through, is just so refreshing and wonderful. It was a great part of it, I thought.
yeah, I was very excited to work on all the spoofs as well.
Yeah.
So I got to really nerd out on a lot of things, like like Lord of the Rings references and X-Men references and Monty Python references, all the stuff that I loved as a teenager, that I got to just geek out with. Was a good time.
And so my last question before I turn it over to some people in the audience, did you always know that you wanted to be, I'm going to say, a book creator, because obviously you are now a writer and illustrator?
True. Yes and no. So when I was really young, I thought I would do, like everything anyway. Like, oh, I'm gonna be an artist, and I'm gonna make picture books. And I think my first book I ever wrote was a cookbook for kids. I was maybe like 10, and it had really awesome recipes, like a tuna fish sandwich
Oh,
and peanut butter and jelly.
a visionary.
Yes, it was really it was incroyable. But then as a teenager, I thought, oh, I'm gonna make comic books, and I'm gonna be a comic book artist. And then I thought about maybe writing the books too, but I was more centered on being an illustrator. And then I got to college, and I discovered that all of the art that I was really loving, all the contemporary art that I was drawn to, was all coming from picture books. And so I started reading picture books again, classics, contemporary, and I rediscovered my love of that medium. And I was like, wow, you can really pack so much into just a few pages. Like, that's pretty amazing. So that's what I started to focus on. And at the same time, I mean, I was still collecting comics, but my taste started to kind of evolve. And my attention was drawn away from the superhero comics, which I still love and I think they're awesome. But there was kind of a revolution of sorts happening in comic books, where there were these graphic novels coming out, maybe more based on memoir or maybe a little more gritty. And I was really attracted to those. And I was kind of seeing like, oh, reading a book like Stitches by David Small was like, wow, I never knew a comic book could be like this. So that really opened me up to a lot of possibility. And so I kind of tucked it away while I was pursuing my picture book career. Like, I think graphic novels though, like that would be cool one day. But yeah, it was stories like that, stories like Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, American Born Chinese by Jean Yang, that really inspired me to tell my story, or, a form of my story.
And so I'm going to turn over some questions we got in from our audience. And
Right.
Zoe asks, what is the best part about doing what you do?
Hi, Zoe. The best part, wow. The best part for me is I'm thinking of too many amazing
it's too
things.
good a job.
I'm like, well, the really best part is finishing it, being done with it, because while it's a joy to make a book, it's also an intense, emotional, exhausting time. Holding it in your hand for the first time is really an amazing feeling. But then hearing from the readers, that really is something special when you've written something and someone else can connect with it. And there are all these strangers all over the world who get you. That's really exciting. And sometimes readers bring this whole new layer of understanding to a story that they end up sharing with me. Yeah, gives me goosebumps.
I have a question here from Scott G, who says, how does writing for a YA audience differ from writing for children?
Hey, Scott. Well, let's see. I think I've been thinking about writing for teens and young adults lately. And I think a common experience for a lot of young adults is that they're after the truth, because as really little children, we're often kept in the dark, right, about how the world works. We're protected from a lot of things. And in starting to become an adult, we want to know, like, well, what's the tea? Like, what's it really about? So I'm not someone that believes in lying to children per se, but there's maybe a more delicate way of explaining stuff to really little kids, a more nuanced way of explaining some intense subject matter, perhaps. And with young adult and teens, I'm very encouraging of just saying it how it is, which I think, I mean, I know as a teenager, I appreciated when people let me know what was real, when they were honest with me, and that they respect me enough as maybe not a full-fledged adult, but as an emerging adult, that I was ready for handling that, and it prepared me for entering the world on my own.
It's like the first time you hear a teacher cuss or curse in front of you, and you're like,
I know,
the
right?
mask has slipped.
I know. I feel like, and I feel like there are some teachers that do that. It's like a little wink, like, yeah, I'm the cool one. Everyone's
You
like,
can
oh
trust
my
me.
God.
Do your homework. You can trust me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna
I
make it
got
interesting.
yeah. I've got a question here from Nidhi who says, I see a lot of books behind you. Which is your favorite? Could you show us some books from your shelf?
Oh gosh, my favorite. I can't say I have like an absolute favorite book because there are too many amazing books in the world. But I mean, I mentioned 3 books before. I also love, if we're talking about graphic novels, I can't stand up because this will yank my mic off
Oh
of my
yeah.
desk.
You can just gesture for
There's
us.
This One Summer by Jillian and Mariko Tamaki, an amazing graphic novel. Um, Also, I love the Frog and Toad series, which is they're more chapter books. So for kind of much younger kids, but man, there's so much emotion in those and such a sweet friendship. And it's also a little I don't think tongue in cheek is the right phrase, but you know, it's not all pretty. There's like a little wah wah. Like there's a little real world to it too. And then with picture books, oh my gosh, I as you can see, I can't get enough picture books. These aren't even all of them. Um, well, I'll pull this because this is a book that I actually grew up reading, and it's a compilation of Golden Book stories illustrated
Oh, it's
by Tibor
gorgeous.
Gergely. So he didn't illustrate all the Golden Books, but he illustrated some, and there's this giant compilation of his work. So I didn't have a ton of books when I was a kid. We didn't really have a lot of money, but my mom read to me from this book almost every night, and I loved the Little Red Caboose, um, Make Way for the Freeway, Toodle. You know, just there are a ton of these stories that mean a lot to me. But yeah, there are a lot of good books out there.
I have a question here from Katie who says, "Did you like getting to do both the art and the writing, or would you prefer to have a partner in the process, or do you like doing both? And which is your favorite?"
I wanted to do it all. Um, because I had a very specific vision for the story. And I've considered, you know, just authoring books before, but this was not the one. Um, I don't know if I can say I like one thing more than the other. I would say that drawing is my first love and is how I usually defer to communicate. Although as I get older, I do find myself doing a lot more writing than drawing in my free time. Um, but you know, I guess these things can evolve over time. So yeah, it's hard for me to place one above the other. I think they just complement each other.
And Lauren says here, if you could have anyone read Flamer, who would it be?
Oh, anyone at all. Really, I would like someone who is struggling right now, who thinks that they don't have a future or that it's not possible for them to find happiness. Um, and you know, not necessarily a gay closeted person, but um, just someone who's feeling at the end of their rope. I hope they read this, and I hope that the story is something for them to hold on to for now. Um, I really want my readers to feel seen and loved, and that they deserve to be in this world, and that they deserve to take up space in this world.
And so Licha, I think I might have said her name wrong, and as someone whose name is always mispronounced, I am very sorry. It's either Lika or Licha. What is it? So I think what she's trying to ask here is, what age is appropriate for your book, Flamer?
The publisher and I recommend 14 and up, or with adult guidance. There are, I think, some kids who are ready for the story who are younger than 14, um, but maybe not everybody. So I would rely on an adult who's read it and maybe knows that readers' level of preparedness to make that call, but otherwise 14 and up.
And Nancy asks, who inspires you?
Ooh, so many people. I mean, if we're talking about books, I love, I mean, I mentioned the Tamakis before, and Jean Yang. I love Christian Robinson's work in picture books. I love, I'm like, this always happens to me. I'm always blanking when I get asked this question, like I've never read a book before. Brian Selznick is a great source of inspiration. You can see some of his books down here. Yeah, and I mean, and then there are people who just inspire me in life, right? Lady Gaga inspires me.
She should read your book. That should be your.
I would absolutely die. So if someone gets his book in a Gaga's hand, I will. I don't know what. You can name your price. I will bake for you for the rest of your life. How does that sound? Yeah, the queens on RuPaul's Drag Race always inspire me. And then I don't know, I have friends and family who inspire me, who are just amazing people. Yeah.
They're in good company with Lady Gaga, so.
Yes, Lady Gaga's family. Yeah.
There's a question from Matt who says, has the lockdown made you more or less creative? Anything in store that came out of it?
You know, I think the lockdown had its silver lining, right? I mean, there were a lot of challenges, but I think one had to get creative to get through it. So what were some things I did? I mean, you know, I still wrote and I still drew, but I'm a very social person, so I had to come up with different ways of hanging out with people. So I got to do things like karaoke Zoom, for example.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
I can't tell if that feels better or worse than regular karaoke.
Yeah. Well, for some people, maybe an improvement. Yeah, just blame the platform. Although I discovered you cannot really do a proper duet over Zoom remotely because it doesn't sync properly, but you know, we had fun. You know, just getting outdoors a lot more inspired a lot of creative work as well. Yeah, and it just really made me appreciate what I have, who is in my life, and made me think about what I really want to accomplish in this life, right? I feel like everybody's getting real serious about what they want to do these days. So it's made me think very hard on future projects, which I'm excited to work on.
And so a question from Zaria here says, what was the first moment where you felt like you had made it as a writer?
Oh, wow. The first time I felt like I made it as a writer, I think my first kind of shock and awe moment, aside from getting my book deal, was when my first book, Little Elliot Big City, came out. I got to go to Book Expo America, which is at the Javits Center in New York City, which is like a huge monstrosity of a building, right? But it's just, it feels like miles and miles of books and booksellers and publishers. And my very first event ever was that, was
Wow.
sitting
Baptism
at a
of fire.
booth. Yeah, sitting at a booth in the Javits Center and having a line just like wrapped around the corner of people coming to get my book, to get it autographed. And I was like, who even am I right now? Like, this is so weird. So that was my first, like, I made it moment, I guess. Followed by many other moments of disbelief, but.
And are there any memorable fan or reader interactions that you've experienced?
Oh, sure. So many. You, I'll share this story. And it's great because this question is reminding me I need to reach out to this person and make sure that they've got a copy. So maybe a year and a half ago, it was a while ago, in the before times.
The before time.
Yeah.
BC, before coronavirus.
Exactly. So I was doing an event, like a diversity panel at the Eric Carle Museum. And afterwards, all the authors were signing books. And I had talked a little bit about Flamer on the panel just as a preview because it obviously wasn't out yet. It just came out last month. And so this woman approached me and asked to get a copy of Worm Loves Worm signed for her. And I was like, okay, sure. And then she was like, I was so excited about this book that you talked about, this Flamer book. And I'm like, oh yeah, it'll come out one day. And she's like, well, my son just came out to me last week. And I was like, oh, and she's like, and he's going to scout camp this
Oh my
weekend. I'm like,
gosh.
what? She's like, and he starts high school next year. I'm like, okay, all right, too much. And she's like, I know, I wish it was around so I could give it to him right now. And I'm like, I wish there was a way I could finish it by this weekend.
You send her the Google Doc.
Yeah, I was like, that's pretty amazing. And, we talked for a while about like, I'm like, thank you for being a supportive parent. And that's all he needs is just love and support and da 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 da. And she's like, yes, yes, yes. And, so please make this book out to him. I'm like, okay, what's his name? Aiden. I'm like,
what?
Now you're lying. Now someone has sent you here. Like, this is a setup. And she's like, no, I swear. I'm like, that is the name of the main character in the book. And she was like, whoa. And then she put her leg up on the table. And I'm like, okay, what's happening now? And she rolled up her pant leg and there was a tattoo that said Aiden on it. And she's like, I'm not kidding. And I'm like, this is insane. She's like, you've literally written a book for my son. And I'm like, okay.
That's crazy.
Good night, everybody. Yeah. That was pretty amazing. So, and that was a while ago. So I hope wherever they are. But yeah, I think
That's
I have a way of
incredible.
tracking her down, but.
Shout into the void. I have a question here from Pratika who says, what is your process for writing? Do you have any tips for budding writers?
I always say, write or draw what makes you smile. And that doesn't necessarily mean like something pretty, but just something that makes you excited. I mean, for example, dessert makes me excited. Cute little elephants make me excited. So I wrote a book about a tiny elephant that likes cupcakes. I think it's important to, instead of trying to pay attention to like trends or whatever is like popular right now, to focus more on what your personal obsessions are. What's your experience? What's your story? Because that's what is going to make your voice unique. When you are writing or illustrating what you know about and what you feel a lot for. So
And
there's
I
my
guess coming off We're coming off the back of that one actually, is that Alice asks, what tips do you have for artists? It seems like that's a more risky pursuit.
Tips for artists. You gotta hang in there. It's a rough road no matter what aspect of art you're trying to pursue, because for as much as art gives this world, it's the world doesn't always reward those who make the art. I think the most important thing an artist needs is community. You need to be able to find people that you're going to be able to connect with artistically, who you can just share how you're feeling and they'll understand. And I have a few people like that in my life who I can just call them and be like, I'm having a day and this piece looks like crap and I don't know what to do with it. And some of that call will be advice driven, right? Where there are people that I trust to like look at it and be like, oh, maybe did you try this or that or da da da. But really the most important thing is just that they get it, that they've been there and that they know that the struggle is real, but that we have each other.
And so I just have a couple of final questions. I have a question here from Beverly who says, what is the ultimate difference you'd like this book to make? How can we encourage more books being written for the LGBTQ community?
The biggest difference, I think, I said before, I hope that it serves as a lifeline for those in need, but I also would like it to be a window for people who don't have a queer experience, who weren't bullied when they were children. And I think it's important for people of varying ages. I think it's important for educators to read a book like this and other books like this that kind of serve as a window for them to look into, just to understand what maybe some of their students' lives are like, or a parent who maybe has a questioning kid. And I'm not saying that this is going to be the same experience for everybody, but I think it definitely speaks to a lot of issues that many of us have faced. So I am a believer in people sharing their stories, and the more queer stories that are out there, the more understanding and compassion maybe we can see in the world. And that really goes for anyone. I think if everyone in the world knew everybody else's story, we may have a lot less conflict than we have right now. I would like to think that. I'm sure we'd also discover like, what? I'm sure there'd be some hidden things that we'd be like, excuse you?
Close that book again.
Yeah, but really, as I said before, human beings are multifaceted and we're very complicated. And most people we meet, we only get to glean them at face value, and we don't really know what else they've got going on. So yeah, I just hope this adds to hopefully the growing pile of stories of people who maybe haven't been represented enough in the world.
And that is a beautiful note for us to end on. So very finally, and I do think that the book is pinned in the comments below, but where's the best place to get the book and the best place to find you?
Well, you can get the book. Basically anywhere books are sold. I always encourage people to support your local independent bookstore. If you don't have a local indie, you can order from bookshop.org. You can buy it online and support an indie somewhere in the world. And other online retailers carry it as well. And then you can find me. Yeah, there's my website, mikecurato.com. You can follow me on Twitter at mikecurato. And I'm mostly on Instagram at Mike_Curato.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone for tuning in and for your wonderful questions.
Thanks,
Have a lovely
Saoirse.
rest of day wherever you are in the world. Thank you
Yes.
so much.